Have you ever wondered what happens when the rules don't quite add up in the jungle world of prisoners? Well, today, we're diving into the jaw-dropping reality of what happens to female inmates in men's jails. It's a story that'll leave you shocked and concerned as we explore the lives of 5 brave women forced to share space with male inmates behind those prison walls. Buckle up for a wild ride as we uncover the untold truths. 5. Abetitubapara. Back in the 90s, there were numerous accounts of women facing harrowing experiences within the confines of male prisons. They've battled everything, from battling inner demons and suicidal tendencies to enduring sexual and physical abuse, starvation, and torture. It's mind-boggling. You're probably wondering, how did she even end up there? Imagine being in a region with 132 prisons but only 6 dedicated women-only spaces. This was the harsh reality for a 15-year-old girl in Abetitubapara, Brazil. Known to us only by her initials Lab, she was arrested on suspicion of breaking into someone's house in October 2007. While Lab didn't steal anything, her act was still considered a crime under the law. Given that her actions were viewed as less severe, she received a relatively mild sentence. Had she just served her time in a juvenile detention center, it might have been a different story. It wouldn't be easy, of course, but certainly a lot less traumatic. But fate had other plans for Lab. She didn't end up in juvenile detention. She was locked up in an adult prison, surrounded by individuals old enough to be her elder siblings or even her parents. This situation posed a significant problem, and it all boiled down to a simple yet crucial reason: the law. You see, the law explicitly states that individuals under 18 should be placed in juvenile detention facilities, not in adult penitentiaries. Anything contrary to this legal mandate is considered not just against the law, but downright illegal. But the issue extended beyond mere legality. It was a dire threat to public safety and the rights of young individuals. Cesar Brito, the president of the Brazilian Bar Association, made a compelling argument, stating that incarcerating a young girl alongside adult men amounted to a severe case of criminal negligence against women. But why is this such a grave concern? How damaging can it be for a child to be incarcerated with adults? Adult courts focus on delivering justice to the accused, while youth courts adopt a more delicate approach. Their goal is to punish and rehabilitate, guiding young minds toward becoming responsible citizens. In essence, it's a specialized strategy to prevent these young individuals from becoming repeat offenders. Placing Lab, a juvenile, among adult criminals completely undermines this purpose. Yet that's not the worst part of the story. Lab didn't just end up in an adult prison. She was confined with 34 adult male inmates, all of whom had been convicted of various crimes. The story of Lab had taken the internet by storm, not solely due to her placement in a male facility, but because of the shocking and unbelievable turn of events. Growing up in a broken household, this young girl had forsaken the idea of attending school. Instead, she often sought refuge in a district notorious for its exploitative child trade. Her living situation was precarious, as she frequently moved between her uncle's residence and her parents. She had minimal adult supervision in her life. Astonishingly, it took a considerable amount of time before her family even became aware of her arrest. And when they finally did, it was already too late to rectify the situation. She found herself in a male prison, surrounded by other inmates. Her father made an effort to secure her release, but this is where things took a troubling turn. According to the girl's father, he faced threats and coercion from the police to falsify his daughter's age. He was pressured into claiming that she was 19 years old, a move intended to justify her placement in an adult jail, given that individuals above 18 can be incarcerated in such facilities. In addition to being compelled to lie about his daughter's age, he was denied the opportunity to visit her, despite only the police, the judge, and a public defender having access to her in jail. Despite being aware of her presence, they took no action to secure her release. Now, you might wonder just how dire Lab's situation was during her time with these male inmates. It's crucial to understand that the men Lab was confined with hadn't interacted with a woman in an incredibly long time, years upon years. Imagine their reaction when they suddenly found themselves sharing space with a living, breathing female. You can probably guess where this is heading. These men didn't distinguish her as a minor. All that mattered to them was that she was the polar opposite of a man. They showed no discrimination. As you can imagine, This decision had devastating consequences for the girl. On the second day of her 26-day confinement with these men, she went to the bathroom, unaware that she was under surveillance, essentially like prey among 34 predators. While in the bathroom, one of the men clandestinely entered, restrained, and assaulted her. After he was done, he casually left as if it were a done deal. But for Lab, it was far from over, because once this precedent was set, there seemed no limit to the horrors they could inflict upon her. She was subjected to horrifying treatment, becoming their source of entertainment, an unfortunate scapegoat, and a personal object for their amusement. Under cover of night as she slept, some men would insert scraps of paper between her toes and set them ablaze, causing excruciating pain that would jolt her awake, leading to anguished cries. This sadistic act was precisely what they desired, and it tragically evolved into a sickening tradition. To make matters worse, her feet bore the lasting scars of these burn tortures. But this was merely the beginning of her ordeal. Her fingers endured the same torment for their sadistic pleasure. She experienced prolonged hunger and was denied food for most of her captivity, with the only respite coming when she reluctantly agreed to their sexual demands. She faced sexual assault every day of the week, except on Thursdays when intimate visits were allowed in the prison. Disguised as a man after her hair was forcibly cut, it became exceedingly difficult for visitors to discern her true identity in this perilous environment. Torture and starvation were employed as punishments if she dared to resist their demands. And only after she had appeased all the men was she granted meager meals. There appeared to be no hope, as even her desperate cries for help went unanswered. Not even the police and correctional officers around her intervened, and they might still have remained oblivious if not for a tip to the media. However, this is not the end of the story. This was not the first time this young girl had been placed in a male's prison and subjected to unimaginable abuse. However, the law has finally caught up with the individuals responsible. But there still lies a big question. What really happened? The prison spaces were limited, but why did they force her father to lie? Why shave her head to hide her identity? And why didn't anyone help, even while she screamed for help? 4. Isabel Penal Colony. When moms give their kids the stranger danger talk, it's not just about fearing the worst from strangers. It's deeper than that. It's about realizing that even a simple conversation with someone unknown can shatter lives and have long-lasting consequences. Here is a story that might make you rethink the power of a casual encounter. Meet Anthony McGladrigan, a 51-year-old man whose unfortunate tale you won't hear from him personally. He found himself in a bewildering situation where a stranger, whose friend he once rescued, stabbed him not once, but 9 times. Though this didn't result in a life-or-death scenario, it illustrates how talking to a stranger can set off a chain of events that no one could predict. Now let's switch gears to another heart-wrenching narrative connected to this web of stories, shedding light on the hidden aspects of Lab's tragic fate. We'll keep the identity of a young girl born in Santa Isabel do Para, a municipality merely a 2-hour drive from Abaetuba, where Lab lived. Unlike Lab, this girl did nothing wrong, or so the reports suggest, but she was molested like a sex slave. She was a young girl, a year younger than Lab, innocently enjoying some time on the beach by herself. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger approaches her with a job offer in domestic work. You might wonder if there's an exception to the stranger rule here. Consider this. Brazil was grappling with a rising unemployment rate, a staggering 8.6% increase in that year. It might seem small compared to other countries, but it was a significant factor in this girl's decision to engage with a stranger. These two seemingly separate tales are inextricably linked, uncovering the intricate complexities of Lab's tragic story while illuminating broader social challenges in Brazil. The implications of the 8.6% unemployment rate in Brazil translates to a staggering 9 million people facing joblessness and struggling to make ends meet. Now, whether the girl in our story should have engaged with the stranger is a decision I'll leave to your judgment. However, it's essential to consider that Para, like many other regions, grapples with this pressing issue of unemployment, which can push people into challenging situations. And in her case, she didn't just respond to the stranger. She took immediate action. She entered the vehicle with the mysterious woman who had transformed into her recruiter. Before she knew it, 2 other teenagers joined them. But this wasn't the beginning of a journey to legitimate employment, as promised. Instead, the car was headed to a place that would send shivers down your spine: the Santa Isabel Penal Colony. Now, if the name alone doesn't give you chills, let me fill you in. Santa Isabel Penal Colony stands out as one of the most notorious male penitentiary facilities in the entire state of Para, Brazil. I wish I could say this was clickbait, but it's not. Here, the inmates are far from being scared of the guards. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The guards lock them up to protect themselves from the inmates. Yes, you heard that right. The guards are essentially prisoners at Santa Isabel Penal Colony. The inmates inside wield power and control with access to a frightening array of weapons, drugs, and substantial financial resources. Think of them as bosses in a makeshift empire behind bars whose influence extends beyond prison walls. This disturbing dynamic came to a head in 2018 when a prison war erupted. Armed assailants unleashed chaos, detonating grenades to breach the prison walls and firing through the bars to free certain inmates. It turned into a deadly standoff, with guards caught in the crossfire, facing heavily armed attackers outside and inside the prison. Tragically, that day claimed the lives of 20 individuals. It might be hard to believe, but this same prison where the woman took these teenagers, including a vulnerable 14-year-old girl, houses 350 dangerously armed men. The question that gnaws at you is, why would she bring these girls to a place like this? Well, it's a harrowing tale with an unsettling motive. The sex trade, where young girls were exchanged for a substantial sum of cash. Now, think about those stacks of money. They must have been substantial, given the type of inmates in that prison. These weren't just run-of-the-mill convicts in shabby cells. We're discussing something much bigger. Big enough to send 3 teenage girls into what can only be described as hell on earth. Of course, there are lingering questions about how this woman managed to infiltrate the prison. How did she bring in these girls without anyone noticing? It's a perplexing mystery, and your imagination might run wild because, in reality, nobody really knows how or why she wielded such power and access within those prison walls. But here's the chilling twist. The girls didn't casually stroll into that grim environment. The woman had already drugged them while they were in the car en route to the dreaded prison. According to the 14-year-old Brazilian girl, they were coerced into consuming illegal substances and forced to ingest a terrifying amount of alcohol. The next thing she knew, she was dressed in a prison uniform, surrounded by 350 grown men, each more menacing than the last. And let's be clear, this isn't a tale from a TV drama like Orange is the New Black. There's nothing scripted or fictional about this. It's a horrifying real-life ordeal that defies belief. According to the girl, she was sexually abused by more men than she could count and forced to spread her legs without caring about her safety, pain, or life. She endured repeated beatings and brutal torture that would make you believe she was a hardened criminal. If you're familiar with the harsh reality of prison life, you'd understand that there's no limit to the unimaginable torment within the walls of dangerous male prisons, just like the one she found herself in. She cried out into the night, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. It was a harrowing ordeal, a trap from which there seemed no escape. To the outside world, it was as if she had vanished. Her parents, if she had any, would have been frantically searching for her, oblivious that she was imprisoned for a business deal gone horribly wrong. On the 4th day, against all odds, she managed to break free from the nightmarish existence she had been subjected to. While the exact details of her escape remain mysterious, several theories are circulating. One of the most plausible explanations is that she slipped through the prison's rear exit and into the surrounding jungle. As terrifying as the Santa Isabel Penal Colony might sound, the back of the prison, as of 2011, was relatively unguarded. And when you think of dense forests, you can't help but think of the feral creatures that inhabit them. For this young girl, it became a choice between the possible threat of wild animals, which might have been little more than folklore, and the 350 dangerous men who sought to treat her like a mere plaything, engaging in unspeakable acts I won't delve into here. As you can already guess, she took her chances with the wild. Soon after the girl's escape made headlines, authorities hurriedly erected a fence around the prison. However, when she finally spoke about her ordeal, she mentioned that it was an honest correctional officer who had come to her rescue and subsequently helped her secure legal representation. As for the 2 other teenagers who were still confined then, their fate remained uncertain, and one can only imagine the horrors they might have endured. In the men's jail, Lab endured 26 days of relentless torture and abuse. This young Brazilian girl suffered unspeakable violations at the hands of numerous men within a facility housing 350 male inmates. However, the grim reality of female experiences in male prisons extends beyond this, with some enduring fates so dire that they become irreversible, leaving lasting scars. While Para, the state where this took place, may have limited resources, it's hard to deny that some shady dealings were likely taking place behind closed doors, possibly involving debatable practices. What remains indisputable is that females face an incredibly challenging and perilous situation in this environment. 3. Vicky Thompson. When a judge delivers the final verdict in a criminal case, the defendant faces a critical decision: accept their fate or contest it in court. In the latter scenario, defendants sometimes resort to saying the most disturbing things, as exemplified by the case of Keith Ferguson. He received a life sentence for the murder of his wife and father-in-law. When the judge handed down his sentence, Ferguson unleashed a tirade of profanity, vowing to meet everyone in hell. However, as chilling as his threat was, it pales compared to Vicky's response. She was sentenced to 12 months in a male prison, and her words sent shivers down the spines of those in the courtroom. In her unshaken voice, she declared, "I'll leave that male prison in a box." Now, in case you're wondering, when Vicky mentioned a box, she was alluding to a coffin. She looked at the judge squarely and stated with unwavering confidence that she anticipated dying within those prison walls. Remarkably, neither the judge nor Vicky's mother was swayed by her dire proclamation. I'll delve into why shortly. Vicky harbored an intense dread of the male prison system and held a grim conviction that she wouldn't survive her time there. Despite her boyfriend's tireless efforts to secure her transfer, tragedy struck on the fateful evening of November 13th, a Friday, at precisely 8:48 p.m. Barely a month after her initial arrest, Vicky drew her last breath. What transpired in that male prison to make Vicky so resolute about her impending demise? The answers to these questions lie within the depths of her harrowing story. Let's rewind to the beginning. Vicky Thompson, known by her full name, was born in Keighley, England, renowned for its beer and iconic landmarks. She was often characterized as fragile, not due to physical weakness or lack of intelligence, but because of her emotional vulnerability. While her peers were preoccupied with making friends and passing exams, Vicky grappled with gender dysphoria, a deeply personal and emotionally charged struggle that would ultimately shape her tragic journey. Vicky spent her childhood grappling with a question that can send shivers down anyone's spine: who am I? But her journey was far from ordinary, marked by a series of traumatic events that would test even the strongest of spirits. During her early years, she experienced a horrifying ordeal at the hands of a family friend, enduring grooming and sexual abuse that no child should ever endure. The scars from this dark chapter in her life ran deep. She also suffered physical abuse from other family members, leaving her emotionally battered and struggling to make sense of her identity. At the tender age of 16, she found herself in another harrowing situation. Faced with a potential assault, she took matters into her own hands and got arrested for physically defending herself. It was a desperate act of survival in a world that had already shown her its darkest side. She veered down a treacherous path, getting entangled with drugs and alcohol, a choice that only exacerbated her turmoil. Her life took a turn for the worse, and on that fateful 18th of October, she found herself in police custody again. This time, it was for violating an order related to a prior shoplifting conviction, compounding her already mounting legal woes. To make matters even more complicated, she missed her probation appointments twice, pushing her further down the legal rabbit hole. The consequences were swift and unrelenting. She was hauled into court for her transgressions. While some reports labeled her actions robbery, the reality was more complex. She received a 12-month prison sentence. Before her current incarceration, Vicky had already found herself behind bars on multiple occasions. To her, the prison environment was nothing new. What indeed weighed on her mind, however, was the prospect of being placed in a male prison, a situation she found utterly unbearable. Vicky's arrest occurred on the 18th of October, and by the very next day, she was already facing a distressing ordeal. She voiced her concerns about her distressing experience, recounting how one fellow inmate had left a card under her cell door, addressing her as wifey. The note extended an unwelcome invitation for her to spend the night in his cell. For Vicky, this chilling message confirmed her worst fears, unfolding just 24 hours after her initial arrest. Remember that when one person attempts and succeeds, it's likely to trigger the interest of others who want to take their chances too. They won't approach individually. Instead, they'll come in groups, much like swarms of insects. Imagine a prison cell designed for 1,200 male inmates. It's difficult to fathom the harsh reality within those walls. Although Vicky never divulged explicit details of her ordeal, her letters gave people a glimpse into her haunting experience. In one letter to her boyfriend, she described her torment in the men's jail. This letter, later revealed in court after her tragic passing, conveyed her despair, stating, "I just feel like I won't be here anymore. I don't know when I'm getting out of here. My head is so I know I'm going to do something silly. I don't want to, but I can't do this." Even during visits with her boyfriend, Vicky could only express her intense hatred for the prison, citing how fellow inmates taunted and criticized her for her clothing choices in a male-dominated facility. But it wasn't solely about Vicky's external hardships. Her internal struggles were equally overwhelming. Having endured significant adversity from a young age, she grappled with emotional instability, elevating her risk of suicide. Staff members once discovered Vicky with a self-inflicted facial wound as she expressed intense self-loathing. Yet this self-harm was just a precursor to the more permanent tragedy. Recognizing Vicky as a suicide risk, the prison placed her under hourly observation. Tragically, on one unfortunate day, the prison was short-staffed, leaving few to check on Vicky. The sole assigned officer was also working overtime. You won't believe what the prison staff had to deal with that night: a barrage of fire alarms and several other issues. In court, it came to light that the officers were grappling with a real challenge: maintaining order in a prison where illegal drugs like synthetic cannabis, often called spice, were running rampant. So these illicit substances entered the prison, and many inmates got hooked, causing significant problems. Shockingly, even Vicky, the unfortunate victim of our story, had traces of these drugs in her system when they examined her after her tragic death. That fateful night, the prison staff had to gear up like warriors before entering a cell in the segregation unit. Just so you know, this cell housed the most dangerous prisoners among the 1,200 male inmates, including Vicky. As the officers made their rounds, they encountered a hazardous situation. As they approached Vicky's cell, they found her alone in the pitch-black darkness, thanks to a broken light. This, unfortunately, proved to be a fatal situation. Imagine these officers, already grappling with a rampant drug problem, now faced with a heartbreaking tragedy. Amid a prison riot, Vicky managed to take her own life by hanging herself. And when they reached her, it was too late. She had known she wouldn't make it out alive, and sadly, she didn't. But Vicky's story isn't the only one. Some brave women have survived the horrors behind those imposing prison walls and are willing to share their experiences. 2. Tara Hudson. The whole human race revolves around the idea of survival of the fittest. This concept, championed by Charles Darwin, applies not just to humans, but to nearly all creatures on Earth. It's a simple truth we all share: the instinct to survive. Even women coexisting with many men in challenging situations, such as in prison, share this fundamental drive to stay alive. The case of Tara Hudson, a 26-year-old who landed in prison for a few months after a barroom altercation. However, her experience turned into a unique struggle for survival. Tara's ordeal began when she was placed in a male prison due to discrepancies in her birth certificate, feeling like she was being doubly punished for a single offense. Inside those prison walls, survival wasn't merely a choice, it was a necessity. Personal space, sanity, and bodily privacy were luxuries she couldn't afford. She faced constant pressure from fellow inmates, some of whom made inappropriate demands, leaving her in fear and vulnerability. Tara recalled her distressing experience, saying, "I had a lot of men trying to get me to show my breasts. I'd seen a lot of violence. It was very, very scary." In her own words, Tara described the challenging environment she endured while incarcerated with men. She detailed instances of unwanted physical contact and her constant fear of potential assaults. Given her appearance and past as a glamour model, she felt out of place and unsafe. In such dire circumstances, Tara had to find a way to protect herself. Let's discuss Tara's survival strategy, best described as flashing. Now, you might already know what flashing means, but for those who don't, let me explain. Flashing is when someone reveals their private body parts to tease or provoke. However, in Tara's case, it was not about teasing. Tara resorted to flashing as a means of self-preservation. If she didn't do it, she could have been in grave danger or even subjected to abuse. So in a way, she thought that if men got a glimpse of what they wanted to see, they might satisfy their desires through masturbation and she could find some peace. Surprisingly, this tactic worked for Tara. Shortly after her arrival, she felt pressured into showing her breasts through a small hatch in her cell door. She believed that if she didn't comply, the harassment could escalate or something worse might happen. It was a terrifying experience for her, and besides the fear, she endured more traumatic incidents, including depression and suicidal thoughts. However, it's worth noting that, thanks to her flashing strategy, Tara managed to avoid full-blown sexual abuse during her time in prison. She faced groping, harassment, insults, and isolation. 1. Mary. Endurance might not always be the most admirable quality, as Mary, known only by her pseudonym, tragically discovered during her time in prison. She endured unimaginable abuse at the hands of numerous men, a horrifying ordeal that included sexual abuse on a staggering scale, over 2,000 times. Mary was subjected to coercion, physical violation, and relentless abuse, an ordeal beyond quantification. With no photographic record or real name to identify her, it's believed she concealed her identity to avoid further unwanted attention. Mary's ordeal began with her arrest and conviction for car theft, leading to a 4-year prison sentence. What should have been a mere prison term turned into a nightmarish experience for her upon her arrival at Brisbane's infamous Bogo Road Jail. If you thought Menard Correction Center was notorious, Bogo Road Jail was its sinister counterpart. Initially intended for short-term incarcerations, Bogo Road Jail, named after the road that led to it, devolved into a place where inmates rarely tasted freedom. Inmates were more likely to meet their demise than serve their sentences. This grim reputation lasted for 109 years, until riots prompted changes in the law, resulting in longer incarcerations. However, this transformation offered no solace. In 1903, Bogo became a male-only prison, housing society's most heinous criminals, killers, murderers, and violent offenders. Imagine Mary's dread when she received her 4-year sentence at Bogo, surrounded by the worst of the worst. Mary couldn't find words strong enough to describe the nightmare she endured. It was like living in hell on earth, she once confided. Her ordeal within the prison walls was a chilling story of manipulation, threats, and the brutal exploitation of vulnerability. Imagine being coerced and intimidated into sexual acts. Your dignity stripped away, your consent meaningless. That's the grim reality Mary faced. Worse, once you consent to their demands, you become an easy target for others who want their share. A nightmarish cycle that feels more like rape than consensual engagement. It's a sickening experience that leaves you feeling utterly defenseless. Mary even admitted that, at times, she wished for death rather than enduring prison ever again. But it wasn't just one assailant. It was like a pack hunted her. If Mary dared to refuse any men, she'd suffer brutal beatings far beyond what we typically imagine. It wasn't mere strikes with rods. It was a horrific ordeal where a group of men, known for their violent and criminal pasts, subjected her to savage torture. With time, Mary stopped resisting, perhaps hoping that compliance might spare her further agony. In a tragic twist, Mary began to believe that enduring the sexual assaults and beatings was her only means of survival. She convinced herself that taking their abuse would make them leave her alone. But the torment didn't stop at the physical and sexual levels. Mary was also subjected to severe mental and emotional abuse. Her cherished long locks were cruelly sheared off, symbolizing the destruction of her self-esteem, self-worth, and identity. One can't help but wonder if this isn't one of the most horrifying tales of incarceration ever. Being locked up in a men's prison is daunting enough, but to endure relentless torture in such conditions is a nightmare beyond comprehension. Consider enduring over 2,000 sexual assaults in just 4 years, a recurring nightmare that taints every waking hour. 4 years is the time it takes for a child to grow from a newborn to a 4-year-old. Yet this was the horrific reality Mary faced for that entire duration. To compound her anguish, she lived under constant fear of these dangerous strangers. While Mary eventually survived and was released from her sentence, it's doubtful she'll ever fully recover. The same fate awaits the other women who suffered alongside her.